Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a mission that takes us deep beneath the surface of cybersecurity.
Yeah, we're really not talking about the latest firewall rules or, zero-day exploits today.
No, not at all. We're talking about the ultimate organizational blueprint, the foundational rules of engagement that really dictate how security works at a strategic level.
This is the governance layer. We are talking about policy, ethics, corporate structure, and this is the interesting part, the rigorous mathematics of risk that let a modern business operate securely and profitably.
I like the analogy of a house. If you think of security as a house,
Then this is the building code. It's the foundation, the structural integrity plan. It's everything that holds it all up.
in our sources today, they distill these core professional standards, the kind of thing you'd need if you were building or governing a serious security program, often touching on materials you'd see in high-level certification prep. So our mission is to take these critical, sometimes really confusing concepts, like the subtle but huge difference between accountability and responsibility, or how you actually calculate risk in dollars and cents and deliver them to you as a highly structured and applicable understanding of secure governance.
It's the essential shortcut, really. It helps you move past being a technician who just manages tools to being a leader who understands the strategic why behind every single security investment.
Okay, let's unpack this then. And I think there is no better place to start than at the very foundation of the security profession itself, the ethical contract.
That's absolutely the right place to begin.
So professional ethics.
When we talk about security professionals, the people you trust to safeguard your most valuable assets, we have to start with the idea that their effectiveness just hinges on trust and conduct.
It's all about trust.
It is. And the foundational belief here is, well, it's very simple, but it's incredibly powerful. Ethical behavior means you abide by the rules, and crucially, you do nothing harmful to anyone else.
And if those beliefs are the moral compass, then I guess policies become the map, right? They're the codified corporate rules that are designed to enforce that ethic across the whole organization.
Precisely. And for professionals who are part of these global organizations, like, say, those certified by ISC2, strict adherence to a code of professional ethics isn't just a suggestion. It's a non-negotiable condition of keeping that certification.
So it's a lifetime commitment.
It is, yeah. The preamble of this code is very explicit. It requires adherence to the highest ethical standards for, the safety and welfare of society, the common good, and of course, the duty you owe to your principals, your employers, your clients, and to each other.
That immediately sounds like a potential conflict. You're establishing a dual loyalty, one to your employer, but also one to the greater good.
It is a recipe for conflict, and that's exactly why the code relies on the 4 canons. These are the pillars that structure the whole ethical framework. And what's absolutely essential to understand is that they have to be applied in a specific, prioritized order if a conflict comes up.
Okay, so that order dictates the hierarchy of duty.
Yeah.
Let's walk through that priority list, because that's a massive insight into what a professional's obligations really are. What's number one?
Number one, and this is the one that always overrides all others, is to protect society, the common good, necessary public trust and confidence, and the infrastructure.
So that puts the security professional in the role of a public guardian first and foremost.
That's it, before anything else.
So let's take a scenario. Your employer asks you to deliberately ignore some critical zero-day patching on, an outdated piece of public-facing infrastructure. They say the downtime is just too expensive.
Right.
But you know that if you ignore it, you're exposing millions of customer records or maybe threatening critical public services. What does Canon 1 demand you do?
Canon 1 demands that you refuse. Simple as that. Your duty to the infrastructure, to public trust, and to society outweighs your duty to save your employer a few hours of maintenance cost. It is the ultimate mandate.
Okay, so once that overarching public safety duty is satisfied, what's next on the list?
The second canon. This one addresses your personal conduct. Act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally. This is all about your personal integrity. It ensures that the way you deliver security solutions is, above reproach. You have to operate within the law, always.
And the third canon brings us back to the immediate work environment, to the client or employer.
That's right. The third canon requires you to provide diligent and competent service to principals. This is your commitment to your employer or your client, to be thorough, to be skilled, to be dedicated. But notice where it sits.
It's below society and legal conduct.
Way below. So if fulfilling a client request requires you to act illegally, or to put society at risk, canons 1 and 2 stop you in your tracks.
So only after those three massive and often conflicting obligations are met do we finally get to Canon 4.
The fourth and final canon is to advance and protect the profession. This means sharing knowledge, mentoring others, maintaining the reputation of the field. This whole structure ensures that professional ego, or, self-interest, never trumps public safety or the law.
So it defines the security professional as being fundamentally different from, say, an accountant whose primary duty is often just to their client.
Exactly. It's a much broader responsibility.
This ethical foundation, then, it leads directly to reframing what security's role even is.
It does. Historically, security was seen as what? A cost center? An annoyance that just slows down business?
The Department of No.
The Department of No, exactly. That perspective is just fundamentally flawed for modern governance. Security focuses on protecting assets. And an asset is anything that represents value and implementing controls that ultimately increase the value of those very assets.
And that is the essential insight. Security has to be seen as an investment in stability and trustworthiness. It's not just about locking things down. It's about enabling the business to pursue more ambitious goals more safely.
Precisely. And that's why the two core security objectives are, 1, to allow and enable the organization to achieve its goals and objectives. Think about reliable e-commerce or trusted supply chains. And 2, to increase the organization's overall value.
So if security is successful, the assets themselves become more trusted, more resilient, and therefore their market value, whether it's intellectual property or customer data, it actually goes up.
Yes. And to achieve that kind of strategic alignment, security can't just be a departmental thing. It can't be driven by the people in the basement who are only managing the technical side of things.
No, it has to be top down.
Absolutely. It has to be managed top down instead of bottom up. It needs alignment with the overarching corporate strategy, which means funding, policy creation, direction, all of it has to be driven and continuously funded by senior management.
And only when that mandate comes from the top can security objectives really align with the broader corporate goals.
And that ensures that security spending is seen as a strategic enabler, not just some mandatory tax you have to pay.
Okay, so when we talk about protecting assets, we have to rely on some foundational models. The traditional security model, the CIA Triad, is where all policy begins, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
These three concepts, they form the absolute bedrock of protective measures. Confidentiality prevents unauthorized disclosure. It's achieved through things like encryption, sure, but more importantly, through administrative controls, like the principles of need to know and least privilege.
So ensuring only the right people can access the assets they absolutely need for their job.
And nothing more. Confidentiality is about controlled access, making sure the right people see the right things. Integrity, then, is about controlled alteration.
Making sure the data is trustworthy.
Integrity is vital. It protects assets from unauthorized or even accidental changes. It ensures the data is accurate, timely, current, and meaningful. If your data lacks integrity, the organization can't rely on it for critical decisions, which means the data itself loses its value.
And the controls for that are things like hashing, digital signatures, strict change management.
All of those, yes. And then there's availability, which is the one that causes the most immediate financial pain if it fails.
You feel that one right away.
Oh, yeah. Availability just ensures critical assets are accessible when they're required by stakeholders. This is a measure of organizational continuity. If a system is perfectly confidential and has perfect integrity, but it's taken offline by a ransomware attack or a power outage, its value immediately drops to zero.
So protecting availability requires things like redundancy, strong backups, swift disaster recovery plans, all based on how critical that asset is.
And how much uptime it needs.
Now, in the last decade or so, we've seen that traditional triad proved to be, well, a little insufficient in some areas, especially around legal accountability and identity in these big decentralized systems.
That's right, which is why we've added two crucial modern concepts, leading to the term CIA++A.
So what's the first edition?
The first is authenticity. This is essentially proof of origin. It proves that assets or users or transactions are legitimate and bona fide. It verifies trust and origin.
So think of it in the context of a global supply chain. If you download a software update, how do you know it hasn't been tampered with?
Authenticity is the answer. And you usually establish that through digital certificates or multi-factor authentication. It's paramount in a world that's just flooded with digital content where verifying the source is really difficult.
And the second key addition, which is so vital for legal standing, is non-repudiation.
Non-repudiation is the assurance that someone cannot dispute the validity of something. It's the inability to deny having performed an action or holding accountability for it.
So if a user who is authenticated with robust methods initiates a critical wire transfer.
Then non-repudiation ensures they can't legally or contractually claim later, oh, I was never on the system, someone else must have done it. This requires ironclad logging, timestamping, and cryptographic proofs of action and identity. It's what makes accountability legally enforceable.
So the 5 pillars: confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, and non-repudiation, they provide the comprehensive framework for defining the security posture of literally any asset the organization owns.
That's the complete picture.
All right, so moving from that conceptual framework to the actual organizational structure, we enter the domain of governance. And as we established, the ultimate goal of governance is to enhance organizational value.
Which means security efforts have to move beyond just blind enforcement and truly enable the business to operate.
It sounds like we need some mechanisms to make sure we're not over-securing or maybe under-securing based on what the business actually needs.
That's exactly where 2 key mechanisms come into play: scoping and tailoring. This is how we bridge that gap between abstract policy mandates and operational reality.
Okay, let's focus on scoping first. What does that involve?
Scoping is all about determining boundaries. It looks at all the potential control elements, all the possible security rules, best practices, standards documented globally, and it determines which ones are in scope and which are out of scope for your specific organization.
So an example would be,
Well, if you don't process any partholder data, then the entirety of the PCI DSS regulations would be out of scope for you. Scoping is fundamentally about adhering to the laws and regulations that actually apply to you. It defines your mandatory baseline.
so scoping defines the universe of rules that we have to play by. Once that universe is established, tailoring then refines those rules to fit our specific culture and risk tolerance.
Correct. Tailoring takes those applicable in-scope security controls and it refines them, enhances them, or modifies them. It ensures they're perfectly effective and aligned with the unique goals and risk appetite of the organization.
So if a law mandates you encrypt data, that's the scoping part.
Right. Tailoring is then defining the specific algorithm, the key strength, the rotation frequency you're going to use to meet that requirement in the most efficient way for your specific system architecture.
So scoping is what you must do. Tailoring is optimizing how you do it.
You've got it.
Okay, now we arrive at what is maybe the most critical distinction in organizational governance: the trinity of accountability, responsibility, and liability. These terms get used interchangeably all the time in conversation, but in a governance structure, their distinct meanings carry monumental legal weight.
This separation it's absolutely foundational. Let's start with accountability. Accountability can never be delegated. The person or the entity originally accountable for an asset or a policy, they always remain accountable. They are the ultimate buck-stopping entity.
Right, so if a CEO is accountable for the company's financial performance, they can delegate the execution of sales strategies to a VP. But if the company misses its targets, the CEO is still the one held accountable by the board.
Exactly. Responsibility, on the other hand, can be delegated. You can delegate the function of protecting data to an employee or to a third party, like a cloud service provider, a CSP. The CSP then assumes a contractual responsibility for performing specific tasks, like patching servers and maintaining uptime.
But this is where the liability twist comes in, right?
Mm.
Especially now with so much outsourcing. When a company uses Amazon or Microsoft to host its data, they've delegated the responsibility for physical protection. But who's liable if that data is breached because of a zero-day exploit the CSP missed?
The liability always follows the accountability. Always. Accountability resides with the asset owner, the organization that collected or created the data in the first place. That data owner is ultimately liable for the data if a breach occurs, even if the CSP failed to meet its contractual responsibility for protection.
So the liability, the regulatory fines, notification costs, reputational damage, all of that stays with the organization that chose to process the data.
Yes.
That makes the due diligence of vendor management exponentially more critical. Because you can sue your CSP for a breach of contract, maybe, but you can't make them pay your GDPR fine. And the reputation damage is yours alone.
And that leads us directly to the legal standard used to evaluate the asset owner's conduct. Due care versus due diligence. These 2 concepts define whether or not the accountable party acted appropriately.
Okay, explain the difference.
Due care is often called the reasonable person standard. It's the responsible protection of assets. It's the standard of conduct a reasonable and prudent person would exercise in a given situation.
So if your data center is in a hurricane zone, due care would dictate that you have generators and off-site backups.
Exactly. Due care is the action itself. It's doing the right thing.
So due care is the action. What's due diligence?
Due diligence is the ability to prove that you have exercised due care. It's the active, ongoing investigation and the continuous effort to understand the required protections and ensure they are maintained.
So you could be performing due care like patching a server,
Yeah.
but if you fail to perform due diligence.
Like documenting the patching schedule, reviewing audit logs, and assessing vulnerability reports.
Then you can't legally defend yourself if an incident occurs.
Precisely. Due diligence is the evidence of due care. Failing due diligence leaves you exposed. You might have done the right thing, but if you can't prove it, from a legal perspective, you failed.
Okay, so to see this structure in action, we need to map the accountability and responsibility to specific roles in the organization.
Yes, these roles are essential in any formal governance structure.
Let's start at the top tier: owners, controllers, or senior management.
They are the accountable parties. Their duties include implementing appropriate security controls that are consistent with the main security policy, determining the sensitivity or classification levels of the data they own, and determining who gets access privileges.
Yeah.
They define the what, and they're the ultimate signatories on risk acceptance.
Then we have the information systems security professionals, the CISO, the IT security officer.
These are the responsible executioners. They are tasked with the design, the implementation, the management, and the ongoing review of all the organization's policies, standards, baselines, and procedures. They translate the strategic mandate of the owners into an operational security program.
And often collaborating with them is the General Information Technology Officer, the IT officer.
The IT officer is focused on the technology solutions needed to support the business. They're responsible for developing and implementing those technical solutions, and they have to work in lockstep with security and business continuity teams to make sure that operational speed doesn't compromise security.
And who is responsible for providing objective proof that this whole system is actually working?
That's the information systems auditor. They are so crucial because they provide management with independent assurance. Their job is to stand outside the system and determine whether the security objectives defined by the owners are appropriate, whether the controls are effective, and whether the whole security mandate has been met.
Independence is key to their value.
It's everything.
We also need to distinguish the role of the custodian. What do they do?
The custodian is the function, and it's often IT personnel or a CSP, responsible for the actual storage and protection of data based on the owner's input. So if data corruption happens because of a system error, the operational responsibility for that corruption rests with the custodian who manages the system.
But the accountability.
The accountability for having corrupt or lost data still rests squarely with the asset owner.
So the owner holds the legal bag, security officer sets the rules, and the auditor checks the homework. It's a clean chain of command that defines the structural flow of authority and liability.
The very clean chain.
Okay, so now we take this structure we've built and we give it teeth. Governance is executed through documentation. This hierarchy of rules is what turns abstract security concepts into concrete enforceable actions.
And this framework is just non-negotiable for auditability and compliance. You can't expect employees to follow rules if they aren't clear about what's mandatory versus what's merely suggested.
So at the top of the pyramid, we have policies.
Right. These are the corporate law, derived from the will of senior management. They communicate management's high-level goals and objectives. For example, we will protect all personally identifiable information in accordance with all applicable laws. They provide the authority, and they define the scope of the security team. They have to be formally approved and communicated across the whole company.
So policies are the what and the why. What translates those philosophical goals into specific technology decisions?
That's where standards come in. Standards specify the concrete hardware, software solutions, mechanisms, and products that you have to use to comply with the policy.
So if the policy says employees must use secure remote access,
the standard says all employees must use VPN software X with multi-factor authentication token Y. Standards can also mean adopting external guidelines, like implementing the controls from ISO 27001.
Okay, so policy is the goal, standard is the tool. What about the mandatory, specific steps required to operate those tools?
That is the procedure. Procedures are mandatory, step-by-step descriptions on exactly how to perform a task. If an employee has to register a new user or execute the disaster recovery plan, they follow a procedure. There's no flexibility here. It has to be done exactly as written to ensure consistency and compliance.
Procedures define the operational flow. Below that in the hierarchy, we have baselines.
Baselines define the minimal implementation methods or levels for security mechanisms. They set the hard floor for configuration management. A baseline might mandate that all web servers have to be hardened by disabling unused services, or that the required encryption strength between two application tiers must be AES 256. They ensure a minimal security configuration is uniformly enforced.
And finally, the lightest touch in the hierarchy, guidelines.
Guidelines are just recommended or suggested actions. They offer flexibility. They allow the organization to suggest best practices like recommendations for choosing secure passwords without making it a hard requirement.
And that's useful from a tactical perspective.
It is, because if an employee fails to follow a guideline, it doesn't create a negative audit finding, unlike failing a procedure or a baseline.
In terms of maintenance, given how quickly technology changes, it seems intuitive that the operational layers would need more frequent review.
Oh, absolutely. High-level policies might be reviewed every few years, maybe, but standards, procedures, baselines, and guidelines, they have to be continuously reviewed and often updated quarterly or semi-annually. If a new vulnerability is discovered in the software named in a standard, that standard have to be updated immediately.
Okay, so governance also means understanding the legal mechanisms used to protect the organization's most valuable intellectual assets. Intellectual property laws, or IP laws, are designed to encourage creation by granting creators exclusive rights. We need to clearly differentiate the four major types of IP protection.
Its clarity is essential because each one protects a different aspect of innovation and has vastly different rules about disclosure and how long the protection lasts.
Let's start with the one that gives a company the most control: trade secret.
A trade secret protects business information, proprietary formulas, processes, customer lists, recipes, things like the composition of a specific soft drink. The crucial part is that no public disclosure is required.
And the protection can last forever.
Potentially, yes. As long as the information remains secret and you make reasonable efforts to protect it, the protection is enforced against misappropriation, stealing it, disclosing it illegally. Once it's disclosed publicly, that protection is gone.
Now contrast that with a patent.
Patents protect functional innovations, novel ideas, inventions, how a machine works, a new chemical compound. Unlike trade secrets, disclosure is required. You have to publish the details of the invention for the patent to be granted.
And it has a set term.
A set term, typically 20 years. In return for that temporary monopoly, the public eventually gets access to the idea. It protects the holder against anyone else making, using, or selling the invention.
Then we have copyright, which is for artistic and creative efforts.
Right. Copyright protects the expression of an idea that's embodied in a fixed medium, so software code, a blueprint, a song, a book. Disclosure is required. The term is very long, often the life of the author plus 70 years.
And it protects against copying.
It protects against copying or creating substantially similar work. The key is that it protects the form of expression, not the underlying idea itself. You can't copyright the idea of romantic comedy, but you can copyright the script for one.
Makes sense. And finally, trademark.
Trademark protects identifiers used to distinguish a product or a company, logos, slogans, brand names, specific color schemes. Disclosure is required. And like a trade secret, it has a potentially infinite term as long as that mark is actively being used in commerce.
And it protects against confusion in the marketplace.
Exactly. It ensures consumers can clearly identify the source of goods or services.
So as soon as an organization operates globally or deals with advanced technology, it immediately runs into international legal constraints, starting with import and export controls.
These are country-based rules that govern the movement of products, technologies, and information.
And these controls often come from national security concerns, right? Preventing sophisticated tech from falling into the wrong hands.
Precisely. Take the Wassenaar Arrangement. This is a multilateral export control regime. It's aimed at managing the risk posed by strong cryptography and dual-use technologies. It helps member countries exchange and use strong crypto while preventing terrorist groups from getting it.
So it's a delicate balance between facilitating trade and safeguarding national security.
A very delicate balance. And within the U.S., you see this split in regulations like ITAR and EAR.
Okay, what's the difference there?
ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, is focused entirely on military applications, controlling the export of items on the U.S. munitions list. EAR, the Export Administration Regulations, covers commercial items like computers and software.
But there's a critical wrinkle there.
There is. EAR also includes commercial items that might still have military applications. These are dual-use items. If your standard commercial laser technology could potentially be weaponized, it falls under strict EAR control. This is a very common complexity for tech companies.
And this complexity is just magnified tenfold when we talk about transborder data flow. These are laws that restrict data transfer across national borders, almost always concerning personal data.
And this is a major governance headache because, as we talked about, accountability for protection resides with the organization collecting the data, no matter where that data physically travels.
And global cloud services make this accountability extremely difficult.
It does, because your data might reside temporarily in a dozen different countries, each with different privacy requirements, before it even reaches its final destination.
Let's nail down the specific definitions of the data we're trying to protect here. Privacy itself is defined as the state of being free from observation. But data related to privacy comes in many flavors.
It does. Personal data is any information that uniquely identifies an individual. The terminology varies. You'll hear PI, PII, SPI, PHI, but it all requires protection.
And we categorize the identifiers themselves based on how direct they are.
We do. We distinguish between direct identifiers, information that immediately and specifically identifies someone, like their name, ID number, fingerprint, address, and indirect identifiers.
And indirect identifiers.
Right. They can't uniquely identify someone on their own, but when you combine them with other seemingly harmless pieces of data like a zip code, age, and job title, they can absolutely pinpoint a specific person. Secure programs have to guard against the combination of these indirect identifiers just as diligently as they guard the direct ones.
So the current landscape really demands a highly structured approach to privacy governance, starting with clear roles that are derived from that accountability and responsibility principle we talked about.
Yes, and we can look at 4 key privacy roles here.
What are they?
You have data owners who are accountable. They define the data classification, approve access, and set the rules for retention and destruction. You have data custodians who are responsible for protecting the data based on the owner's input. They manage the technical infrastructure.
Okay, and
Then you have data processors, who are typically third parties that process data on behalf of the owner. And finally, you have the data subjects, the individuals whose data is being processed and whose rights must be protected above all else.
Now, GDPR is the modern benchmark here. But we also have these established non-mandatory standards that provide a prudent course of action for any organization, like the OECD privacy guidelines.
The OECD guidelines summarize 8 core principles. And while they aren't mandatory law, if you adhere to them, it gives you a very robust defensive posture. They include things like collection limitation, only collect what you absolutely need, and data quality, make sure it's accurate and timely.
Also, purpose specification and use limitation.
Right. Define why you're collecting it up front, and then only use it for that stated purpose.
What about protection and transparency?
The other principles cover that. You have security safeguards implementing reasonable protection. Openness, being transparent about how you handle data. Individual participation, giving subjects control over their own data. And of course, accountability, that clear responsibility structure we just discussed.
To make sure an organization is actively meeting these standards, they have to use a privacy impact assessment, or a PIA. And this isn't just a quick checklist, it's a formal, structured process.
The PIA is essential for identifying and mitigating privacy risks proactively. The goals are to identify risks of a breach, determine the necessary controls, and ensure ongoing compliance. It's a continuous effort, not a static report you file away.
And the process involves 8 structured steps. Let's slow this down and explain what each step actually achieves for the listener.
Okay, absolutely. Step 1, identify the need for the PIA. This happens whenever a new project or system or data processing activity is initiated. If you're launching a new customer loyalty program, you start here. Step 2, describe the data processing. You document exactly what personal data you collect, where it comes from, where it goes, who sees it, and what happens to it at the end of its life. You're creating the data map.
And step 3 sounds critical.
It is. Step 3, assess necessity and proportionality. You have to justify that the data you're collecting is absolutely necessary to achieve your stated purpose, and that the degree of collection is proportional to the business need. If you only need an email address, collecting a full home address is disproportionate.
Step 4 is about consulting.
Yes. Step 4, consult interested parties. This means engaging with data subjects, privacy regulators, internal stakeholders to get feedback and be transparent about what you're proposing.
And then you get to the risk itself.
Step 5, identify and assess risks. Once you know what you're doing and why, you analyze the legal, technical, and operational risks. What's the risk of unauthorized access, accidental loss, or misuse?
Step 6 is about fixing those risks.
It's mitigation. Step 6, identify mitigation measures. Based on that risk assessment, you define the controls you need, encryption, anonymization, access limits, to reduce the risk to an acceptable level.
Then step 7 is sign off.
Right. Step 7, sign off and record outcomes. Senior management and the privacy officer formally sign off on the mitigated risks and the implemented controls. This is how you document your exercise of due diligence.
And finally, it's not a one-and-done process.
No. Step 8, monitor and review. Because regulations and technology change, the PIA can't just gather dust on a shelf. It has to be monitored and periodically reviewed to make sure the mitigation measures are still effective. This ensures the organization is continuously performing due diligence.
We've established the ethical foundation, the governance structure, and the compliance framework. But none of this matters if the people, the employees, are the weak link. The sources are so clear on this. Personnel represent a constant security risk that policies have to actively mitigate.
The statistics are just undeniable. The majority of significant security incidents involve either human error or internal malicious activity. So, personnel security policies have to be rigorously applied throughout the entire employee lifecycle.
And that life cycle begins long before the employee even starts work.
It starts with candidate screening and hiring. Policies have to define the appropriate level of background checks and verification, and that's based on the sensitivity of the role the person is going to have.
Next step is the onboarding phase. This is the critical moment for establishing that security contract with the new employee.
This is when the legal basis for control is established. Before they get their badge, before they get any system credentials, new employees have to formally review and sign off on company security policies, acceptable use policies, and any other agreements. You have to ensure there's a clear contractual understanding that if they don't follow these rules, it can result in termination.
The most delicate and often the riskiest phase is offboarding or termination. This has to be handled with, well, surgical precision.
The speed of offboarding is everything. Prior to or in conjunction with the employee being notified or leaving the building, 2 mandatory actions have to happen at the same time. All their system access must be disabled, and the fact that their employment is terminated has to be communicated to all relevant parties: IT, facility security, the physical access team.
Any lag there is a huge risk.
Even a minute. Any lag creates a high-risk window for a disgruntled employee to do something malicious.
There's also a severe scenario that governance has to plan for: employee duress. An employee being forced to perform an action, maybe by an armed threat.
This is a policy of last resort, but it's absolutely necessary. Organizations use keywords or code words that an employee can use during a seemingly normal conversation, like a phone call to the help desk or even a system login prompt to signal to the security team that they are acting under duress.
And that triggers a special protocol.
It does. It triggers an internal protocol that verifies the threat and initiates a specialized response, all without escalating the physical danger to the employee. It's an acknowledgement that sometimes the security threat is the person holding a gun, not the person sitting at the keyboard.
Okay, to manage the inherent risk of trusting human beings, organizations have to implement these systemic controls that are designed to prevent or detect long-running fraud.
And we have a few critical ones to talk about.
The first of these is job rotation.
Job rotation is a long-term control. It involves regularly rotating staff in key sensitive positions. The security purpose is very clear. It prevents any one individual from having sole control over a process for long enough to commit and successfully cover up fraud.
And the knowledge that someone else is going to come in and do your job acts as a deterrent.
A powerful deterrent.
Yeah.
And you get the added benefit of cross-training and business continuity.
And the more immediate detection control is mandatory vacation.
Mandatory vacation is often described as a forced audit. You require employees in critical roles to take a set, contiguous vacation period. This forces another employee to step into that role and perform their duties.
And if the primary employee has been doing something nefarious,
the temporary replacement will often just stumble across discrepancies or irregularities that lead to detection. The activity is detected not by a machine, but by a fresh pair of eyes.
The most common control for preventing errors or fraud from the start is separation of duties.
Separation of duties is designed to prevent a single employee from compromising a system or committing financial fraud entirely on their own. It mandates that critical tasks require authorization and execution by more than one person. This ensures that collusion is necessary to bypass security control, which drastically increases the difficulty and the visibility of any fraud.
And linking all this back to the CIA Triad, we use need to know and least privilege to limit the damage a compromised account can inflict.
Least privilege is the technical mandate. Grant only the minimum system permissions necessary to complete the assigned work. Need to know is the administrative mandate. Restrict access to sensitive assets only to those who require the information to do their job. They're complementary principles for minimizing the potential blast radius of an insider threat.
And finally, all these controls are underpinned by contractual agreements.
Right. Agreements like non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, and non-compete agreements, NCAs, establish the legal framework. NDAs protect confidential information shared during employment, and NCAs restrict an employee's ability to use proprietary knowledge to compete against the company right after they leave. These agreements just reinforce that personnel security is both a technical and a legal issue.
Okay, we've established the governance blueprint. Now we move into the quantitative side. Risk management. This is where security transitions from being a set of rules to being an analytical economic science.
It is. Risk management is the process of identifying, assessing, and prioritizing risks, followed by the economical application of resources, and I really want to stress economical, to minimize, monitor, and control the probability and impact of those risks. It's all about making rational, defensible investment decisions.
And the entire risk process follows a logical flow.
It does. It starts with determining value, or asset valuation. You have to know what you're protecting. Then comes risk analysis, determining the specific threats and vulnerabilities targeting those assets. Finally, you move to treatment, where you choose one of four methods: avoid, transfer, mitigate, or accept.
And since threats and technologies evolve continuously, this process has to be ongoing.
It is continuous and it's arduous. It often follows the Deming cycle or Plan, Do, Check, Act. You plan your controls based on risk, you do the implementation, you check the effectiveness through audits and testing, and you act based on the findings, which circles right back to updating the plan. It ensures that risk management never stagnates.
Okay, so before any analysis, you have to identify and rank assets from most to least valuable. How do organizations even approach valuing something as intangible as customer trust or intellectual property?
They use two main approaches, often in parallel: qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis.
What are the characteristics of qualitative analysis?
Qualitative analysis is faster, simpler, and it relies heavily on professional judgment and organizational experience. It doesn't assign a specific monetary value. Instead, it uses a relative ranking system, low, medium, or high, to express risk, likelihood, or impact. It's useful for quick prioritization, but it lacks objective metrics.
And quantitative analysis brings in the hard financial metrics.
Quantitative analysis attempts to assign objective monetary values to every single element: the asset, the loss, the cost of the control. While it provides the most objective assessment, it is extremely difficult and time-consuming.
Why is that?
Because assigning accurate financial data to intangible losses, like the cost of lost reputation or customer churn, is highly subjective and really complex.
Okay, so once assets are valued, we look at the interaction of the three required components for risk to even be present: asset, threat, and vulnerability.
A threat is any potential danger.
Right. A hacker, a system failure, a flood.
Exactly. A vulnerability is the weakness in the system or policy that the threat can exploit, like unpatched software, poor encryption, or an unlocked door.
And the person or force that causes the damage is the threat agent.
The threat agent is the entity that executes the threat. It could be an external organized crime group, a disgruntled employee, or a natural force like an earthquake. The resulting negative consequence is the exposure or impact, the cost of the breach, the fines, the downtime.
And what we use to combat this are countermeasures or safeguards.
Those are the controls implemented to reduce the impact or likelihood of the risk being realized. And finally, and this is crucial, there is residual risk. It's the risk that remains after you have implemented all your controls. You can never eliminate risk entirely. You can only reduce it to an acceptable level.
So the primary goal of quantitative risk analysis is to determine the annualized loss expectancy, or ALE. This is the financial metric that dictates how much should be spent on mitigation. We need to walk the listener through these steps very clearly.
The ALE represents the expected monetary cost of a specific risk occurring over the course of a single year. It provides management with a clear, defensible budget ceiling for mitigating that risk.
And the primary formula is ALE equals SLE times AR.
It is, but we first have to calculate the single loss expectancy, or SLE.
The SLE is the monetary loss for a single occurrence of the risk. How is that calculated?
The SLE is calculated by multiplying the asset value, AV, by the exposure factor, EF. So SLE equals AV times EF.
Let's use a concrete example. Suppose we have a critical database with proprietary IP. We calculate the asset value, the AV, including replacement and market value, to be, say, $10 million.
Okay. And if the threat is a successful ransomware attack, we might estimate that the exposure factor, the EF, the percentage of the asset we'd lose, would be 40% or 0.4.
Why 40?
Well, maybe while the data is encrypted, we can eventually recover from backups, but we lose 4 days of operation and half the IP valuation in that time.
So $10 million AV multiplied by 0.4 EF gives us an SLE of $4 million. That's the cost of one single event.
Correct. Now we introduce the time factor, the annualized rate of occurrence, or ARO. This is how often the risk is expected to occur per year. If historical data suggests a successful ransomware attack happens once every 5 years, the ARO is 1/5, or 0.2.
And if it happens twice a year, the ARO is 2.0.
Exactly. So using our example, the SLE is $4 million. The ARO is 0.2.
We multiply them together. ALE equals 4 million times 0.2.
Which gives us an ALE of $800,000. This means the organization can expect to lose $800,000 annually due to this specific risk if no further mitigation is applied.
And this $800,000 is the number the C-suite cares about. It defines the budget. If a new security control, say a robust network segmentation system, costs $150,000 annually to maintain, and it reduces the ARO from 0.2 down to 0.05, that is a cost-effective mitigation.
It is, because the new ALE would be 4 million times 0.05, which is $200,000. So you reduced the expected annual loss by $600,000 for an investment of only $150,000. That $450,000 difference is your return on security investment, your ROI.
But if the control cost $900,000,
it would not be financially justifiable, and management should probably choose to just accept the risk instead.
Okay, so once risks are quantified using ALE or qualitatively assessed, management has to select a treatment method. There are 4 established risk treatment methods.
The first is avoidance. Avoidance means you just stop the activity that exposes the asset to risk. If you realize processing PII in certain countries is too high risk and expensive to mitigate, you just stop serving those regions, or you cease processing that type of data entirely. The consequence here is always opportunity cost, the business opportunity you miss.
Next, transfer.
Transferring risk means shifting some of the financial consequences to a third party, most commonly by buying cyber insurance. It can also mean transferring operational responsibility to a third party's CSP through a contract, though we know the ultimate accountability always remains.
The third, and the area where security teams spend most of their time, is mitigation.
To mitigate risk, you implement controls, safeguards, or countermeasures to actively reduce the risk likelihood or impact to an acceptable residual level. This is the implementation of firewalls, encryption, training, policy, all of that.
And finally, acceptance.
Accepting risk means taking no action or no further action on that risk, because the cost of mitigation is greater than the ALE, or because the organization has deemed the residual risk after mitigation to be tolerable. Acceptance must always be formally documented and approved by senior management.
Now, when we talk about mitigation, we need to categorize controls by their functional roles. There are 7 major types that are often layered in a defense-in-depth strategy.
Yes, and we can start with the policy and behavior controls.
Okay.
Directive controls are policies and rules that force or encourage compliance, like mandatory security training or a sign that says, all data must be encrypted. Deterrent controls are meant to discourage policy violation by making the consequence clear, like a CCTV camera sign or a prominent warning banner on a login screen.
Then we get into the controls that interact directly with the threat itself.
Right. Preventive controls stop undesired actions from occurring in the first place. A firewall that blocks malicious traffic or a strong access control list are great examples. Detective controls are designed to identify that a risk has already occurred. An intrusion detection system or continuous audit logging are examples. They confirm a breach is happening, but they don't stop it.
So once a threat is detected, we need the response controls.
That's the role of corrective controls. They minimize the negative impact after the event. So if an antivirus detects malware, the corrective control is the mechanism that deletes the file and cleans the system. Following that, recovery controls focus on restoring systems and data to normal operations, like restoring from a backup.
And the final type, which is used to fill in any gaps.
That is the compensating control. It makes up for the lack of another required control. If a specific system can't support two-factor authentication, a compensating control might be mandatory supervision during its use or increased physical security around it.
The definition of complete control then becomes the ideal combination of all these functional roles.
Complete control is the synergy of at least preventative, detective, and corrective controls working together. And in a layered security model, this combination should ideally be implemented at each layer, from the network perimeter right down to the application layer, to provide resilience.
We should also note the classification of controls.
Yes, safeguards are proactive measures put in place before a risk manifests, like preventive controls. Countermeasures are reactive responses implemented after a risk has occurred, like recovery or corrective controls.
And finally, we have to ensure that any control satisfies both its functional and assurance aspects.
The functional aspect is simple. Does the control do what it was designed to do? Does the firewall actually filter traffic? But the assurance aspect is the proof. Can the organization demonstrate that the control is functioning properly on an ongoing basis?
And this is verified through testing, logging, monitoring, and auditing.
Yes. A control that fails the assurance aspect, like a backup system that works but is never tested, is functionally useless in a governance context.
Okay, moving into modern development environments, general risk analysis often isn't granular enough. We need systematic threat modeling to proactively identify and prioritize potential attack vectors, particularly in software development.
Threat modeling is used to systematically identify, enumerate, and prioritize threats related to an asset or a specific piece of software. It flips the focus from securing against known vulnerabilities to, well, thinking like an attacker. And we rely on formalized methodologies like STRIDE, PASTA, and DREAD.
STRIDE is the foundational threat-focused methodology.
STRIDE provides a quick, systematic checklist to ensure analysts consider 6 common categories of threats. The letters stand for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege.
So STRIDE helps categorize the type of attack. But for really complex systems, we need something more strategic and tied directly to business risk, which I guess brings us to PASTA.
PASTA process for attack simulation and threat analysis is a much more detailed, risk-centric methodology. It's designed to align the threat landscape directly with organizational objectives. It's an attacker-focused approach that follows 7 distinct stages.
Let's elaborate on those 7 stages, as this is a key takeaway for anyone in a governance role.
Okay, Stage 1. Define objectives. What are the business goals, security policies, compliance requirements? You set the context. Stage 2. Define technical scope. You map out the system, the technology stack, the deployment environment in detail.
And Stage 3.
Stage 3, application decomposition. This is where you break the application down into its components, its data flows, its trust boundaries. You define all the interacting elements and identify critical assets within the application itself.
Then you analyze the threats.
Stage 4, threat analysis. Using that decomposition map, you analyze known threats and potential attack vectors, often guided by a model like STRIDE. You identify where the most valuable data is and how it moves.
Stage 5 is vulnerability analysis.
Right. Stage 5, vulnerability weakness analysis. This moves beyond abstract threats to concrete weaknesses in the code or configuration that a threat can exploit. You scan, you test, you analyze the technical flaws.
Then you model the attack.
Stage 6, attack modeling. This is the simulation phase. You model specific, realistic attack scenarios against the vulnerabilities you found. This demonstrates the likelihood of an exploit succeeding.
And finally, Stage 7 brings it all together.
And finally, Stage 7, risk and impact analysis. You take the results of the attack models and you quantify the consequences, assigning qualitative or quantitative risk scores to inform your treatment decisions. PASTA is a holistic method that ensures security is built in, not just bolted on at the end.
So once a threat is identified, DREAD is often used to rank the severity and prioritize what you fix first.
DREAD is a scoring mechanism that ranks severity based on 5 factors: damage potential, reproducibility, exploitability, affected users, and discoverability. Using DREAD scores helps management allocate resources to fix the highest impact, easiest to exploit issues first.
And while we focus on these highly technical, systematic models, we have to reiterate the biggest weakness identified across all threat landscapes.
Social engineering. It uses deception, manipulation, or intimidation to get people to provide sensitive information or perform actions against their own self-interest. It just bypasses all your expensive technical controls. The only viable mitigation is a continuous investment in awareness, training, and education. You are training the human firewall.
Finally, in a world dominated by outsourcing and cloud services, risk management has to extend to every external relationship. Supply chain risk management, or SCRM, applies our governance methodology to all vendors, suppliers, and service providers.
And SCRM has to be mandatory for all third-party acquisitions, and it has to start as early as possible in the procurement process. If you bring in a new vendor, they inherit your governance requirements, and they introduce their own set of inherent risks.
This process relies on clear documentation that defines expectations and how they'll be measured. We see three key documents here: the SLR, the SLA, and the service level reports.
The service level requirements, SLR, is the internal planning document. It outlines the detailed service descriptions, the organization's performance targets, and mutual responsibilities before the service is acquired. It defines what the customer organization needs.
And that internal requirement then becomes the contractual agreement with the vendor.
That is the service level agreement, SLA. This is the contract between the customer and the provider. It must clearly communicate security requirements, uptime metrics, governance stipulations, and explicit language detailing compliance with all relevant laws and regulations. The SLA is the document that defines the CSP's delegated responsibility for protection.
And after the service is operational, we need assurance. And that comes in the form of regular service level reports.
Right. Service level reports are issued by the vendor to the client, providing transparent insight into the vendor's ability to meet that contractual SLA. Key components include metric achievement, identification of any issues that occurred, and, crucially, third-party SOC reports. These SOC reports provide independent audit assurance that the vendor's internal controls are operating effectively, which supports the client organization's own exercise of due diligence.
We have completed a really comprehensive tour today. We started with the ethical grounding of a security professional, moved through the governance hierarchy that enforces policy, and we ended with the science of quantitative risk assessment and advanced threat modeling.
A lot of ground to cover.
What really resonates with me is the strategic importance of governance aligning with business goals through scoping and tailoring. It transforms security from a reactive police function into a proactive enabler. And, as we can't stress enough, the legal reality that accountability is non-delegable. The data owner always carries the ultimate liability.
Absolutely. We also emphasize the systematic approaches you need for modern security, from the detailed hierarchy of documentation that dictates daily actions, to the multi-step quantitative risk calculation of ALE that dictates the budget, and the sophisticated analysis required by methodologies like PASTA.
Understanding these principles, ethics, legal compliance, and measurable risk, is what allows you to lead and govern effectively. It is the language that allows you to translate technical necessity into business value.
It is. Now, for our final thought for you to consider, we spend a lot of time establishing that the original data owner remains accountable and liable, even when they transfer operational responsibility to global service providers. But as data becomes more and more decentralized, encrypted, replicated, and processed across numerous jurisdictions using serverless and global cloud infrastructure, how will the definition of the owner and the limits of liability legally evolve when the asset itself exists everywhere and nowhere simultaneously?
That is a fundamental governance challenge for you to mull over as you continue your learning journey.
Food for thought.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the blueprint of secure governance. We look forward to having you back next time.